A reading from the first book of Kings. The son of the woman, the mistress of the house of Zarephath, became ill. His illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And then she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." But he said to her, "Give me your son." He took him from her bosom, carried him up into the upper chamber where he was lodging, and he laid him on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying, by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." The word of the Lord.
We'll say our psalm in unison. I will exalt you, O Lord, because you have lifted me up and have not let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord my God, I cried out to you, and you restored me to health. You brought me up, O Lord, from the dead. You restored my life as I was going down to the grave. Sing to the Lord, you servants of his. Give thanks for the remembrance of his holiness. For his wrath endures but the twinkling of an eye, his favor for a lifetime. Weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. Therefore my heart sings to you without ceasing. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever.
From the letter of Paul to the Galatians. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel that was proclaimed by me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from a human source, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. You have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Jerusalem. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. I advanced in Judaism beyond many among my people at the same age, for I was far more zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But then God, who had set me apart before I was born and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, that I might proclaim him among the Gentiles. I did not confer with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who already were apostles before me, but I went away at once into Arabia and afterwards I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years I did go to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and stay with him 15 days. But I did not see any other apostle except James, the Lord's brother. And I am writing to you before God. I do not lie. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown by the sight to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only heard it said, "The one who formerly was persecuting us now is proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy." And they glorified God because of me. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Not long after he healed the centurion's slave, Jesus went to a city called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow, and with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came forward and touched the casket, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." The dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably on his people." This word about him spread throughout all Judea and the surrounding country. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Grace to you and peace. Please be seated. Good morning. There are people who say that Paul is not the nicest of people because he's a little self-congratulatory at times. And when he's self-congratulatory, he can also be a little hard on others. The letter to the Galatians, it actually fits that profile quite nicely. As I said last week, Paul has been railing on those folks because they've allowed these missionaries, these other Christian missionaries, followers of the way, to come in and say that the Gentiles' love of Jesus and service to Jesus and following of Jesus in the way of discipleship is not enough. They must still be circumcised. You know, you got to hedge your bets when you're a religious person. Make sure you got all your bases covered. So Paul tells them they're really this falling into this old religious traditional view of things, thinking as though one thing has to be this way or none of the rest of it counts, is false. And he talks about his experience with his religious experience, his conversion, and then he says something that people find to be a little conceited, if you will. He says, and I went to these people, and I told them my story, and they glorified God because of me. It's an interesting thing. Only Paul's not coming from any place that is self-congratulatory or conceited. Paul will be the first to admit that he in his life was a zealot for the wrong thing at the wrong time, and he was far too zealous. He was an Episcopalian in a lot of ways. It says so much in the text. He was zealous for his traditions. So anyway, I just thought I'd point Paul's connection to the Episcopal Church out. They glorify God because of me. This is Paul saying, it's not me. It is the God that lives within me and dwells within me. It is the Spirit of Christ that comes through me. It is me getting myself out of my own damn way so that people may see that it is the love of God that is final, the love of God for all people, including the Gentiles who don't get circumcised or the other people in the world who don't do things exactly like we do. It is God's love that is the reality, period. So that doesn't sound very self-congratulatory to me. It sounds like he's got his heart in the very right place. Would that we all could say it's all about God's love, and why don't we just try to get out of the way of it and do our part all at the same time? Great little sentiment. I had a life-changing event this week. I had a theological, biblical conversation with an 8-year-old who set my ignorant self straight. I won't give her name, her full name. She's a member here, though. Her parents are members here, too. But she had a question. Her mother told me that she had an argument with her siblings about about the cavemen and Adam and Eve. And she is adamant that there were no such thing as cavemen because in the Bible it says that Adam and Eve were the first two people. And so I was left to explain this to this 8-year-old while her mother said, "See ya." So we had a conversation. This little girl, we'll call her Allie D. How about that? I'm Alan C. She's Allie D. And she and I, little Allie D and I, had a little conversation about the Bible and the stories in the Bible. And I had a wonderful little answer that I thought would work at least for a little while and buy me some time. And that answer was, so Adam and Eve are kind of like story people. I said, there are people from whom we can learn about how our relationship with God is and how our relationship with each other is. I said, do you know any story people? And I didn't think she'd answer me. She said, yeah. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jumped over to the candle. I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. We don't know who Jack is really, right? But you get the point, you know? So she actually did get it, which meant I had to talk more, and that's when I got in trouble. What I found illuminating about our conversation with her is that I got caught by an 8-year-old into thinking with an either-or mind. So the cavemen did not exist because Adam and Eve were the first person. And I'm trying to reconcile those two things in my head. Well, oh my gosh, how do I explain this to an 8-year-old, let alone a bunch of old folks in an early service or a late service? How do you say, and it all of a sudden occurred to me, after the conversation, because that's when all the good stuff happens, right? It occurred to me after the conversation, why does one have to be in place of the other? Why can't there be cavemen and Adam and Eve? Why can't we be informed by both of those realities? And it began to sort of seep in that there's a certain wisdom in not trying to explain things too much and just continue to ask questions. Well, why can't this be this way? Why can't it be that way? Why can't you see where I'm going with this? And all of a sudden I began to see that exactly what she actually wrote my sermon for me, little Allie D did, that part of what we do here together is expand our version of truth and truth-telling. In relationship with each other, we are moving the boundaries of truth further and further out to incorporate more things, much like Paul was doing ministering to the Gentiles. You say it's all about the Jews and circumcision, but what about all those people who exist out that? They are, in fact, part of the love that is God. We need to move these territories out and to talk to an 8-year-old and to actually listen to one, which I'm not very good at doing, but you knew that, is to expand our notion of what truth is. To begin to incorporate into truth new things that bring life and hope and promise. Something that speaks to God's love in a way that we haven't understood before. It's not exclusive to one or the other. It is all all inclusive. And yet, every one of us is committed to this certain sickness, this dis-ease of death, where we have to see things the way they are supposed to be. Elijah comes into the story right about now. Elijah, who is becoming his own name as prophet, is at odds with King Ahab. Now, historically, if you've been reading in 1 Kings with us, Ahab is known as the absolute worst, sorriest, dumbest, most ignorant, just didn't have his head on right, was following the wrong things king that ever existed in the Old Testament. King Ahab, bad king, King Ahab. Good king, David. See what I mean? King Ahab is the worst king ever. King Ahab's the worst king ever because he married a foreigner, can you say Jezebel, and he started following a foreign god. The name of the god is Baal, B-A-A-L. I don't know how you actually say it. I think the Hebrews say it Baal. So he started following Baal, and Baal was the storm god. The storm god was given all kinds of good credit for bringing the rains seasonally, and Elijah got crossways with Ahab, who worshiped this god, by saying, you know, Ahab, it's really not Baal that does this rain thing and brings fertility and life. That just happens seasonally. That's the way it works. And actually, the person, the thing that brings life, the life-giving force in all our lives, is the one true God, the God that gives us our breath. Well, he gets crossways with Ahab because of this, and he has to kind of flee, and he's on top of himself with all kinds of bad mind thinking. I wish I hadn't have said that stuff to Ahab. This is going to make my life very, very difficult. All this truth-telling that I've been so committed to as a prophet is making my life harder, not easier, and so I just got to go find someplace to stay. Hence, then he runs across this widow in Zarephath, and a widow whose son is sick. And you know the story that we mostly hear in church. It's about when Elijah comes to her and says, will you give me some water? She says, sure. Well, will you fix me a cake of bread? Sure, I'll fix you a little cake, and then I'll feed the rest of my son, and I will both just die. You know this story. You've heard it 100 times. Well, this is the backside of that story. He's already had the cake and the water, and the son actually dies. And then Elijah loses his religious, spiritual mind and starts yelling out to God, was it not enough for you to have me be exiled from my own people and have to run away from the king because he wants to kill me because I'm being too truthful? Is it not enough for that? Then you send me to this widow whose life is hard enough as it is, and now in my presence, her son dies. Is there something about my life? Do you just not like me? Now, nobody here has ever felt that way, I'm sure. But you know what you can imagine what it feels like to think everything in life is bearing down on you, and he has not one thing he can do, one recourse, except to just cry out to God, which he does over the body of this dead son. He cries out to God and says, why don't you for once show up? Bring some life here. Stop this death process that seems to follow me everywhere I go. Stop. Show us life so that people hear, so that I may be filled with something besides the sickness that only sees death. And in the text it says the child breathed, and the word there is neshama. It sounds a lot like the word we use for our Saturday evening service, nishma. It's the Hebrew version of the Aramaic word nishma, neshama, which means not just breath, but it also means to be revived. And all of a sudden, this son was revived with this breath, this life force, this inspiration to live. And at that point, there is a very wise connection made by the widow. The widow says, you are a prophet. You are a man of God because you speak and life comes. And where there is life, there is truth. So at that moment, Elijah begins to see that his learning process is coming complete. I can struggle with the hard things in life, and I can provide a source of life for others. Life is hard, yes. I can be a life-giving influence, yes. The two things don't have to exist separately. There can be the cavemen, and there can be Adam and Eve. An 8-year-old taught me that. How cool is that? So I have been here with you, somebody say it for me. How long? What? 8 or 9 is good enough. 8 3/4. 8 2/3, something like that. And November 1st, it'll be my 9th year here with you. And I'll tell you something, just so you'll know, statistically speaking, rectors don't stay in places this long, but you people are okay, so I might stick around. Anyway, so it's been 9 years, almost 9 years since we've been together. And you know what happens in 9 years? After about 5 or 6 years, all that nice talk that we do with each other, kind of like, we don't have to do that anymore. We can just tell him what we think, and he'll tell us what he thinks, and it'll be, all of a sudden we're working into a new world, an expansion of our truth, and we're moving what we can say to each other out into incorporate new things. One of my favorite writers calls this the expansion of truth. We are able to commit to more truth now in relationship with each other and you with each other than we ever have been. You can say things to me that you could not say 9 years ago, and I can say things to you, and this is where y'all are thinking, yeah, we know. I can say things to you that I could not say 9 years ago. God has brought life into this relationship for us, and we have expanded the boundaries of life and truth and love in this place together, of course, with God's help. Life in the form of wisdom and truth-telling and some very deep honesty about how life is and how hard it is and also how lovely it can be. Those things have helped us to see that it doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to commit to some religious traditions that drive us crazy. I'm not saying all ours do, just once in a while they do. We can commit to what is beyond that, and what all this points to with is the truth and the love and the passion and the life that is God. That is why we are here. So then there's these stories about Jesus, right? And Jesus shows up to us this morning after having healing the centurion's slave last week, and he's going into this small town. Nain would have been a small town. It has a gate, not a big wall. It's just literally a gate, a city gate. And probably the whole town would have been following this widow with her only dead son. They would have been following her out. Everybody would have been behind her. The whole cotton-picking bunch following the road to death that leads outside of the city. Everybody just committed to the process of death. And Jesus walks into that to see this woman, and he says, no, do not cry. There is more going on here than the sickness and disease of death and to all the darkness that we are committed to. There is life. Bear with me for a moment. And the wisdom of Jesus, his prophetic word, his life-giving spirit, all the things that you and I depend upon for our own lives here together, has a life-giving effect in the miraculous raising of this child, this son. We are, you and I, all of us in relationship with each other, fully and completely dependent upon the Spirit of life and truth that is Jesus. That is the thing that calls us into a relationship with the other. It is the permission in spirit that we have to speak freely and to love fully and to share deeply in the life that we have together. To be honest about death and disease and the struggles of life, and to say to each other, yes, in that, those things are tough, we share, but also there is something beyond that that we point to and that we live our lives for, and that is the life and the love and the compassion that we know together, which is the Spirit of God among us. This is who we are. A people in relationship committed first and foremost to life because of the Spirit of God and the love of Jesus. Allie D. is someone I think you ought to talk to. I think you ought to think about, I think we all ought to think about what it is like to be a child in this place and to have the wisdom of a community like this to inform our growing up and our rising up. What responsibilities do we have to that one heart and mind? Who are we and what can we teach? And if it's not the love and life that is Jesus, then let's not say much and let her figure it out on her own. But if we know that life and love and God's presence are what inform us here, then by all means, have that conversation with little Allie D and whoever else there is with each other. Move the boundaries. Set those things way out past anything you've ever imagined. And just talk. Amen. Peace of the Lord be always with you.